We're live.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Noel Gordon, and we're coming to you from Education Solutions International. We have a very exciting topic to discuss this evening, and we have a very special guest. I'd like to mention, before we have Dr. Dice coming to say hi to us, we have participants from Jamaica, Belize, Guyana, Grenada, the Bahamas, Barbados, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, United States of America, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, and hopefully we'll have others coming to join us. We're very excited this evening. Just very quickly, I'd like to mention that our presentation, we will give you certificates for our presentation once you complete the survey. You stay on until the end of the program, and you complete the survey. Once you complete the survey, then we will make sure that we give you that certificate afterwards. And if you have questions, you put them in the chat. At this time, Dr. Dice is coming to speak to us and to greet us, and then I'll introduce our guests. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here with everybody who is on. And I just want to greet everybody and to say welcome. As founder and CEO of ESI, Education Solutions International, it's my pleasure to be a part of this platform and to serve so many educators and educational leaders. So welcome everybody across the entire region that Dr. Gordon just mentioned. And Dr. Gordon is our Chief Academic Officer at Education Solutions International, doing a fantastic job. Look out in your network of teachers and principals and so on. Check out the periodicals that are being sent out to you so that you can keep in the know of what we are doing here at Education Solutions International. If you have not subscribed yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel and subscribe also to our website so that you can get our emails. So Education Solutions International is here to serve everyone as long as you're a part of an educational system. And if you need assistance supporting educational initiatives from instructional practices to leadership, culture, and everything else around classroom management and so on, you can reach out to us. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Gordon. I also want to thank Dr. Dean Robinson for being here and to lead this session on universal design for learning. It's a very good one, and it's the strategies that he will share with all of us to help us better plan for our students. So I'm going to hand over back to Dr. Gordon, who is our Chief Academic Officer here, to take us through the program, and we'll be in the background. Also, very important before I forget, those of us who are on YouTube, drop your questions there and we will get them answered. If you are on Zoom, you can engage in the chat with your questions. And for those of us who are filling out and need surveys, you are going to receive links afterwards to fill out the end of workshop survey. Is very important and you fill that out. Many people have asked us for certificates and we keep on sending them back to go fill out the end of workshop survey because that's one of our criteria to get a certificate. So stay to the end and you will get that link for the donation for certificate, as well as the very important one is the end of workshop survey. All right, Dr. Gordon, back to you, and I'll be in the background here listening.
Thank you, Dr. Dice. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Dean Robinson, who is an experienced educator and instructional leader for over 20 years of service in secondary and higher education across Jamaica and the United States. He began his career at the Meadowbrook High School and later served at St. George's College in Jamaica, where he held multiple leadership roles, including head of department, dean of students, and as part of the senior administrative team. In higher education, Dr. Robinson has taught at the International University of the Caribbean, the University of the West Indies Open Campus, specializing in teacher education and educational leadership. Currently a teacher leader in one of New Jersey public schools. He mentors novice teachers and contributes to district-level instructional improvement initiatives. He's also an active leader in the Verizon Innovative Learning Schools program and a presenter at statewide educational services. Dr. Robinson is a graduate of the Mico University College, holds a master's degree in educational administration with distinction from the University of the West Indies, and earned his doctoral degree in educational leadership from Rowan University. His scholarly interests include educational policy, student growth, and professional learning communities. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you none other than Dr. Dean Robinson. Thank you. Dr. Robinson? Okay, we're waiting for Dr. Robinson.
We're not hearing him.
Dr. Dice?
Yeah, funny. We're not hearing him though. Dr. Robinson, I don't know what's going on with your audio. Yeah, check. Not hearing. You can see him, Dr. Gordon?
No, I'm not seeing him.
Oh, yeah. Dr. Robinson, we're seeing you. We're just not hearing you. Maybe you want to can you log out and log back in?
Let's see. I think, is it better now?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay. All right.
All right, Dr. Gordon.
Guess I had these mics in. All right. Thank you. All right. Thanks for having me, Dr. Dice and Dr. Gordon. Welcome everybody else. Hopefully we can have some meaningful conversations after where we can engage and I can hear some voices. I'm seeing we have at least 162 individuals, quite a big group, but let's see if we can get the conversation going. It will start as a monologue, but hopefully as the conversation ensues, we can get it into a collaborative kind of session. Let's see if I can share these slides. Okay, good. Are we seeing the slides? Seeing the first one?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yes, we see the
All right.
slides.
All right. So I did have an icebreaker, but Dr. Gordon and Dr. Dice did a great job already. And in the interest of time, I think we'll just get right to it, cut to the chase. So this evening's conversation revolves around from compliance to collaboration, using UDL to strengthen inclusive classrooms. And the truth be told, when I came to the United States of America, I caught that kind of fever of using abbreviations, acronyms over and over and over. And sometimes without even paying attention to the fact that people might not even be au fait with these kinds of acronyms, abbreviations. But we'll get to that. But I'm used to saying UDL, but just from the outset, I want to unpack that abbreviation so we can understand that UDL is Universal Design for Learning. Of course, you might have heard it in different settings, but that's what we're talking about this evening. From compliance to collaboration, using universal design for learning to strengthen inclusive classrooms. I also want to establish from the outset, colleagues, that it's not necessarily anything new that I'm going to bring to the table, because oftentimes there's nothing new under the sun. This professor I had at the University of the West Indies, she always says that. Dr. Sonia Jones, I had her for educational management in the master's program, but there's nothing new. She loves to say that, nothing new. And so what we're going to do, we are actually going to bring together some things that we have been doing over the years in my over 20 years in educational practice, put them together, put things in perspective. We're going to see if we can change some of the lenses that we use to frame conversations about education, about teaching and learning. It's also important to note that this session is primarily about special education, but truth be told, it is difficult to talk about special education without having a conversation about general education. And so everybody is really welcome, because we are talking about inclusive classrooms, inclusion, and that automatically translates into a conversation that really engenders everybody if you are in the practice of education. All right. So it's about shifting perspectives, how we frame inclusion. We're going to talk about collaboration a lot. We're going to talk about educational practice. Uh, I want to establish from the outset, though, that I have been out of the Caribbean educational context for some time. Uh, Close to 15 years. Time goes quickly. Close to 15 years. But I really love the educational context in the Caribbean, in particular in Jamaica. I'm Jamaican. You were told I taught at two high schools in Jamaica and did some work at different tertiary institutions. But I want us to focus primarily on the general ideas, the big ideas, as we talk about in contemporary educational discourse. Big ideas, the principles, the big constructs. So we might have some minute examples that will actually bring us to our unique classroom practice or educational context, local context, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, wherever you are, in Jamaica, here in the US. And let's talk about the US. If you're in New Jersey, it might be a different kind of conversation than if you're in New York or elsewhere in the United States. But so we're going to focus on the big ideas that will be applicable regardless of where you are located. To frame this conversation and to plunge us into this discourse, when I thought of this presentation, I thought about voices. The word voices came to my mind, and I wanted to hear voices pertinent to this kind of conversation, right? And what I did, I tried to find some articles from newspapers. So I had something from the Jamaica Observer. I think I have something from the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian, 2025. These are quite recent, but let's hear these voices. The first voice. Inclusive education aims to ensure that every child, regardless of ability, learns together in the same classroom. However, reality often falls short of this ideal. In Jamaica, while policies advocate for inclusive education, implementation challenges persist. And we are seeing the language of inclusion. It's not just about the United States or about Trinidad and Tobago or wherever, but we are seeing where we're having the conversations across the board, even Jamaica, concerning inclusive education. Let's go to the next one. Not sure which order you're going, but you'll follow me. Over the past decade, Edison has shown growth. This is the US. Edison is a public school district in the US, in actually New Jersey, in a district that views inclusion not as a mandate, but as a shared belief. We have in part shifted away from the traditional pull-out models and toward instruction embedded with general education settings. This shift reflects not only a change in programming, but a deep change in mindset. And I want to capitalize on that from the beginning. We're not just focusing on programming per se. We are or only programming, but we are talking about a change in mindset, how we think, how we frame the lenses through which we look at educational practice. In my experience as an educator, I have seen students struggling to decode basic instructions and hear them labeled as dunce by peers. When I intervene, their responses often include phrases like, "Me just can't bother, miss," highlighting their frustration and a system not built to meet their needs. That's a Jamaica Observer, of course. You heard the patois there. I think I'm very good at that, so hopefully I did justice. Me just can't bother, miss. We should be bothered. Somebody missed that, but I'm quoting from the Observer, right? Highlighting their frustration with a system not built to meet their needs. And the last one, the best place to start implementing inclusive educational policy is at the preschool level, because by then, many parents are already aware of some of the learning challenges their children face. With a proper support system in place, teachers can tweak lesson plans for students who learn differently. That's from Trinidad. So all of these voices surrounding inclusion help us to understand or to recognize that this conversation is all over. And of course, I'm going to hear individuals and maybe people, I'm hearing these wonderings. I'm not sure if you can hear wonderings, but I'm hearing these wonderings. I'm not sure if we have that kind of system. When I practiced in Jamaica, now we have the inclusion classrooms in the US. They've had it for a while. We didn't have that. However, what I want to look at is what we can take away and what can inform our instructional practice, even if the system, if they are not exactly the same. All right. So let's push forward. So when you think about inclusion, I did say that we think about special education and general education. And how can we speak about special education without first trying to understand the parameters of special education? And so to help us understand this kind of thing, what we're going to do, we are starting by looking at the different categories, right? And IDEA is what will come to mind. If you're not in the US, you might not be very familiar with IDEA. IDEA is an acronym for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And this is a federal law that ensures that students with disability, they have free, we call it FAPE, that's an acronym, free and appropriate education. And this free and appropriate education must take place in what is called an LRE, a least restrictive environment. And that, at its core, talks about inclusive education. So we'll talk about, not for this conversation per se, but when you think of the special education categories, we talk of intellectual disabilities, emotional and behavioral disabilities, traumatic brain injury, other health impairments, and it goes on and on. The list goes on. Let's take, for example, the ones that we are very familiar with. Under other health impairment, you'll find like ADHD, that we're familiar with a lot. We talk a lot about ADHD, right? Where we have issues in alertness and all kinds of things, or attention deficiencies, executive functionings, that kind of thing. 13. But if you look at the bottom, when I took the slide, it's making a very important point. Be aware of overlap. Look at your state. So let's take, for example, many people usually say that the state of New Jersey added a 14th category. I really don't think it's a 14th category. There's some sort of amalgamation and breaking out. But I think generally speaking, we see 13 demarcating categories for IDEA, that act in the United States. Of course, if we should talk about other areas though, like in the Caribbean, I saw, for example, there's this literature that shows that while Jamaica does not have a formal statutory definition of inclusive education, the National Education Strategic Plan affirms the goal of serving the entire school-age population within an inclusive system. And truth be told, based on my practice, and I've interacted with educators from across the Caribbean as a past student of the University of West Indies, you know that in many cases we would share campus. And again, when I taught for the University of West Indies open campus, I had students from other areas in the Caribbean, and I was able to, when I teach, I tend to use a lot of examples, so I could learn from the different locales. And so it would appear as though there is not much preparation, there's not much as it relates to inclusive education, right? There's some practice in the Caribbean, but truth be told, it is happening because in many cases, it is the students who maybe are autistic or have very serious physical disabilities that are very pronounced who are taken into special schools. But everybody else, especially those with intellectual disabilities, what might happen in our system of meritocracy, what might happen is that those who do very well will pass the exam. I think now they have whether it is PEP in Jamaica, you have different exams, wherever you are. But whatever you use to have students leave the primary level to go to secondary. So the students who work hard, work well, we think are stronger academically, they will get into these prestigious high schools, or those who are better at studying, or those maybe who are better at expressing themselves in writing, or those who are better readers, I don't know, or those who have a certain kind of intelligence. I'm saying this purposefully because it has implications for how we construe intelligence, how we construe education, how we construe brilliance, quote unquote. But I won't delve into that because that is really not the gist of this conversation this evening. But usually that's what happens where but generally we mix everybody. High school, there are kids who are struggling there. When I taught in Jamaica, I taught at two traditional high schools. And by that, we're talking about high schools that the kids who came to us would have passed the exams. They're expected to be the brighter kids, right? But even in that setting, of course, one size just did not fit all because we had different kinds of students from different backgrounds, students with different kinds of interests, students with different kinds of abilities. So technically, it was an inclusive context, but it was not characterized. And even when I practiced in Jamaica, I don't think I characterized it as an inclusive context. I thought I was just teaching and I did what I had to do. Some people fell behind. I tried to help some. We had some sort of remediation, but I don't think there were strategic, sustained, intentional efforts with an understanding that this was an inclusive context. All right. So this will lead us to the gist of this presentation. Why then are we having this? Let me see if I can fix my screen so I can. Good. Why then are we having this conversation? We're having this conversation because inclusive classrooms are the norm. The data shows that 15% of US students receive special education services. And of course, that doesn't mean that it's 15% of the students who are supposed to be classified, because there are a number of students who were not classified for special education, but they really would require special education services if some kind of assessment and evaluation were done. Most students with disabilities spend the majority of their day in general education setting. True? That's true for the Caribbean. That's true for here. That's generally speaking. So what is inclusion? Let's start with the definition. Let's operationalize it by saying we're talking about diverse learners educated together with intentional support for access. Keyword. I should have circled that too. Access and success. And I like how they go together, right? Intentional support for access and success. Now, we're talking about moving from compliance to collaboration, because when you're overwhelmed, when you have a whole lot of students that you have to account for and you don't have enough time, when you don't have resources, it is very easy for you to get into a compliance mode. Compliance in the US, you're talking about getting the accommodations done, IEP stuff done, documentation. We have state mandates, of course, and even in your schools, there's a big shift today towards moving to using data to drive instruction. For example, I was in Jamaica recently and I spoke to a high school principal. She and I had a long conversation, and she started talking about how the schools are using data, and the teachers are being asked to provide the data to actually show where the weaknesses are and to do progress monitoring. I was so intrigued and pleased at the same time, right? So, but it's easy if we don't have the wherewithal, the tools, the resources, and all of that, to just get trapped in a compliance mode to check the boxes. And we go to school, we do the lesson plans, we implement the curriculum, and we check box 1, check box 2, check box 3, and the cycle continues without really impacting, really seeing meaningful change, really resulting in academic success for our students and targeting all our learners. So there is a needed shift. There needs to be a move from compliance to collaborative design. And the UDL, Universal Design for Learning, research-based framework, helps us to understand how we can create this sort of access for all our learners. And we are from different contexts, I had to say that, Caribbean on the whole, and even within the Caribbean. To be honest, if I, we have these macro cultures, but even within Jamaica, even within Trinidad and Tobago, even within Barbados, it depends on where you're from, the community, the parish, whatever. All of these variables will play a critical role. So context will always play a decisive role in what we do and the outcome of what we do. All right. So now we will move on to understanding this UDL so we can frame our conversation correctly. UDL, Universal Design for Learning. Universal Design for Learning. UDL. Everybody should leave this presentation today. Amen. At least you should remember that. UDL, if you didn't know it before, Universal Design for Learning, because for the session, I'll be using that language a lot. UDL. I'll be saying UDL in reference to Universal Design for Learning. So there's that UDL analogy. You know what? I saw this for the first time about 3 days ago, because I am used to talking about UDL. I've done so many presentations about UDL, but I've never used this analogy. But I liked it when I saw it, right? So let's look at it. So on-ramp, traffic flow. So you see those 3 different, should I say stages or phases or whatever? On-ramp, traffic pattern or traffic flow, and off-ramp, right? So with UDL, there are 3 fundamental principles. We are talking about multiple means of representation, on-ramp. Then we go to multiple means of engagement, which is the traffic pattern or on-ramp, right? And then for off-ramp, getting off, multiple means of expression. On-ramp, just as an on-ramp helps a driver to smoothly enter the highway, multiple means of representation help students enter new learning with clarity and confidence. So we talk about multiple means of representation during instruction when the teacher is giving information to students. The information will be represented in multiple ways, right? But I want to make the point because right now, when we see this, we automatically think, but hey, but this is the same as differentiation. If we were in a physical classroom, I would ask you, what does this remind you of? And you'd say, but this is what we call differentiation. Yes, it's really differentiation, but there are some difference in semantics if we talk about with language, because truth be told, when you talk about differentiation, it is usually not as, and I'm going to use the exact word that we use in this acronym, universal, and as UDL, because with differentiation, in many cases, we're talking about flexible learning environments, right? Based on students' individuality, and it's different. Differentiation is like a response. It's a responsive instructional approach where you adjust content and product and process and all of that environment to meet the individual student's needs. But it is similar to UDL, but with UDL, the literature shows that it is a more proactive framework that designs flexible learning environment in advance to account for all learners. So UDL says that it doesn't matter what classroom you are in, whether you think it is homogeneous or heterogeneous, whatever classroom, high achieving, low achieving, regular, whatever you want to call it, I don't know. But regardless of what classroom you are in, we must use these universal educational strategies so that all learners are reached. So when you plan your lesson, you think about all learners. And you think about this in terms of multiple means of representation, of giving the information, right? So for example, the visual, audio, modeling, providing background information so that those kids who need it can benefit. Hands-on experiences, right? Help students connect to previous knowledge, that kind of thing. Use of technology. And I use that. Let me talk about that quickly, because there's a pervasive presence of technology these days. And I think I want to do a study on that, because we hear that technology. But truth be told, technology is here and there are different kinds of technology. But there are times I've observed, I've spoken to students who say, hey, Dr. Robinson, today I would just want to write. I don't want to use a computer. I don't want to see a picture. I don't want to see the screen. They're seeing the screen so much that they just want to go back to the old school writing. So you could have a teacher who goes in the room in order to please maybe administrators or whatever, whomever coming in, who says, listen, we have to do this. You have to be on your laptop. You do it using Canva, and you're using Plickers, using Padlet. You're doing all that today. But the student is like, for me to learn today, I just need a pen and paper. So I just wanted to put that in there. As we talk about technology, we're talking about different learning path. And so we must make allowance for what the students need at a particular time. Just like me, as I'm a lifelong learner. And as a learner, there are times when I don't want to see the screen. There are times, though, when I don't want a pen or paper. I'll just go typing away. So I just want to actually put that in there. So we have multiple means of representation, giving information in a plethora of ways, a whole lot of ways, give information. But then you must have that engagement piece where you have the minds on, not just hands on. I like to say that to teach at school when we are doing sessions, minds on versus just hands on. So it's not about just doing busy work. The mind is supposed to be engaged, but there should be multiple means of engagement. How are they engaged, right? So we're talking about, for example, offering choices. Students need choices, right? Whether you're talking about adult learners, younger learners, people need choices, and choices help us to learn. Using collaboration, we talk about discovery learning. We talk about the old school from when I was at the Michael College, cooperative learning, right? All of that, direct instruction. We talk about little DI and big DI, that kind of thing, using a variety of tasks, right? Differences in challenges. Some tasks are more challenging than others. All of these kind of stuff, right? For traffic flow, different activities, multiple means of engagement. And then the last one, which makes sense, of course, it's mainly about assessment, where we talk about multiple means of expression. So just as different exits lead drivers to different destinations, multiple means of expression allow students to demonstrate mastery in varied ways: writing, speaking, creating, presenting, designing projects, different pathways for learners to express themselves. And I can go back to that conversation I had when I started talking about who we think is bright and brilliant and, all of that. Maybe it is just the kind or the means of expression that we are using for those students. Because if you don't employ multiple means of expression, then that student who has a natural knack for a certain kind of expression is going to appear low functioning, is going to appear weak. In that newspaper article, the word dunce was used, and these words are still being thrown out there, unfortunately. But in many cases, it's because we don't have these multiple means of expression. So that's how we get off ramp. We have the multiple means of expression. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the traditional framework that you would see if you were to go online and research UDL. This is what you would see. But I just like this little analogy. I think it's powerful. So you can go find it. If you go online, go someplace, you'll find it. All right. But you'll see this. So it's design multiple means of engagement, design multiple means of representation, design multiple means of action, expression, right? And if you notice, the framework talks about access, support, and executive functions. And these are very important. Access, support, executive function. How students will access, will perceive, how students will understand, interact, and then how we will guide them, kind of scaffolding, that kind of thing for support. And then the executive functions, which are very, very important, those cognitive processes that enable learners to plan, organize, monitor, and regulate their own learning. Critical. So, and this is the part that in many cases we are missing, those executive functions. And truth be told, the executive functioning capacity has implications for the others, for access and support, right? Because if we can build these executive functioning skills in terms of monitoring, regulating our own learning, that kind of thing, then eventually we're going to have better students who are better able to access information, that kind of thing. So I've learned that, like, for example, whenever I teach, whatever I do, whether it's adults or younger children, even myself, I try to improve, to build on my executive skills from time to time, recognize expectations and beliefs and motivations. In fact, this kind of thing goes well into something that Dr. Gordon, he talks a lot about it. He's a specialist for that, social and emotional learning. I just did a program with Rutgers University with in relation to that. We can talk about that some other time, but I'm sure I've seen Dr. Gordon presenting on these kind of things. That's his area. So it's just showing that when you talk about UDL, all of these strands are actually coming into play. All right. I must also say, though, that you might also find that if you do any research on this, you'll find this little nice umbrella analogy too. I could call it an analogy, like a little graphic umbrella. And I think that came from a university in Canada. I forgot the name of the university right now, but it's a university in Canada that designed it. I like it too. Very nice analogy. But yeah, the University of Lethbridge designed it. But with that, you'll find a fourth category where they will talk about multiple use of environment, which I like. I could embed it into these three, but I could see what those scholars at the university were thinking when they decided to make it a category on its own. Multiple means of environment. So just to say that to you, so as you go back, I'm supposed to whet our appetite know about UDL, but as you go and you do deep digging and thinking and delving, the deep diving, you will come upon some of these other things. So let's push the conversation a little bit. So we talk about compliance. Compliance. Teachers have to implement IEPs with fidelity, especially here in the US, which is far more litigious than the Caribbean societies. You know that you get in trouble easily. You can lose your license. The school can end up in court. Not saying that it wouldn't happen in Jamaica or elsewhere in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, it would not in anywhere else. But we know that it's a little different. It's a different kind of ball game here in the United States. So that usually leads to that checking of the boxes because you just want to make sure you get it done. But it can also happen in the Caribbean context. Can also happen in the Caribbean context where people just check the boxes because they want to make sure that they are actually treating the child as the child is supposed to be treated based on the provisions of the IEP, that documentation and audits, all of that documentation. We have to write, all of that. And so you think we have no time for anything else. It's just to let's make sure we get it done so that we are doing what we are supposed to do the minimum, stay out of trouble, get out of here, that kind of thing. But as it relates to compliance again, we think of like placement, yeah, especially when it comes down to the least restrictive environment, whether it's supposed to be separate placement or it should be placement in inclusive settings. Because we know that here we have like a resource room where you have fewer students. I think, and there's a cap for that too. I can't remember the cap, the state cap. And of course, it depends on the state you're in. But those are much smaller placement resource. You have some programs, like we have a program, that community-based program for those students with more severe disabilities, right? And again, you could have like 2 or 3 kids in a placement like that. And then of course you also have the inclusion where you have a general education teacher and a special education teacher. So I spent a number of years in inclusion, right? Still doing inclusion, where the good thing is I'm a certified general education teacher and also a special education teacher. So I'm always doing inclusion. In my mind, it doesn't matter what I'm doing, I'm thinking inclusion. So there are times when I'm supporting. We're not doing that so much these days. The special education teacher, well, the general education teacher, or I'm working along with the special education teacher, that kind of thing. But which is more what I would do now in my role as a teacher in the middle school. Now, evaluation and accountability pressures. We know that too. That's a whole lot, right? Trying to make sure that we do the evaluation, all of that. All of this can lead to this compliance. Check the boxes, get it done, and move on. So with all of this, UDL will help us if we go according to UDL. This paradigm, this model will help us to strengthen our inclusive classrooms. So let's talk about the inclusive classrooms then, because if we're talking about strengthening these inclusive classrooms, what do they look like, right? So let's see if we can take a look at that. So this is where the co-teaching models will come in. So once you talk about co-teaching, you will see these 6 principal models: one teach, one observe, station teaching, parallel teaching, alternative teaching, team teaching, one teach, one assist. And they are nicely illustrated here. And if you ask me, every single one of them has merits. The problem rests in when someone just uses one for the whole year or for the whole week. But every single one of them has merits. So let's talk about them quickly. We are almost out of time, and I really want us to get some conversation going. But let's talk about them. So one teach, one assist. One teach, one assist. Let's start starting from the bottom, right? When I started teaching in the US, there was a concept of the glorified aide, because you have paraprofessionals in the classroom that help with the teachers, So the one teach, one assist that in that situation, you have one teacher delivering the lesson while the other teacher circulates to support individual students, clarifying misunderstandings and manage behavior, that kind of thing. So you might not hear that other teacher as much. And usually that other teacher is the special education teacher. Many administrators don't necessarily like that one, but my theory is that people don't like it because it's abused, it's misused, but it has merit because, for example, there could be a time when somebody you just want to, you have a special lesson, you have a strong teacher and a certain content for a special day, and for that day, the other teacher is just moving around for that instructional period or for 20 minutes of that period. Whether you're strong or not, you're just going to give support given the nature of the lesson. So, give and take. Not only that, teachers are human beings too. It could be the general education teacher or the special education teacher that is leading. So if you have a teacher, for example, who is not so well that day or whatever, because I've done it before, then I'll say, let's do one teach, one assist. And if you're not so well, then of course, the teacher is not necessarily lazy. I'm getting into the language of educational leadership now, theory X and theory Y, for those of us who are familiar with that. It's not necessarily lazy, right? But there are ways in which it can be used, and there should be allowances for one teach, one assist. Then we have team teaching. Both co-teachers share responsibility for planning, presenting, and facilitating the lesson together, right? So with team teaching, which is my favorite, you will interject, one will say something and you will bounce off each other, that kind of thing. But with team teaching, of course, you know that you have to have two teachers who are highly qualified in the content. It's very difficult to do team teaching. Say you're doing math, one teacher is a content specialist, but the other teacher is not as au fait with the math content. It can be difficult, can be really problematic to do that. It depends on the level, it depends on the content, of course. So we bear that in mind. Then we have alternative teaching, where one teacher works with the majority of students while the other provides instruction to a small group for remediation, right? And again, we could understand this. Usually the special education teacher would be working with the smaller groups because it's those students who are struggling. So the special education teachers would have those strategies to employ, right? But when we're talking about UDL, though, we are saying that it's for everybody because you could have, let's be honest, oftentimes we label students and say a student is just great, just strong, smart. But even within the subject, even within math, even within language arts, there are some students who are strong, for example, at writing, but the reading part, reading comprehension, they're not so good at that. There are some students, for example, when I was in Jamaica, we did writing summaries and statistical reports. There are some students who are good at topics like that, summarizing, and there are other students who are just not so good. But you see what I'm saying? So we oftentimes say this is a great language arts students or math students or social studies students, or science students. But there are different strands within the subject where a student can be weak in a certain area. And if we use UDL from the outset to plan proactively, then we are operating from the notion that students will need different kinds of supports for different days, different topics. That kind of thinking for everybody. I don't care who you are. Even if you scored all A's for the last marking period, you still need supports. That kind of thinking. All right. So we have parallel teaching, which is also a very interesting one. The class is split into two groups, with each co-teacher simultaneously instructing the same content to their groups, right? Parallel. So you just look at the nice illustration we have here. You have one set, I have one set. And of course, it can be very noisy and confusing, but it depends on how you work it, right? Back in the day, especially in the Caribbean, I've never seen it, but when I studied education and society, we talk about the term has left me now. Back in the day, where you had like I forgot it, but where you have multi-grade system, right? So sometimes it was just like a chalkboard separating. You have a sixth grade and a seventh grade. So you have teachers working close, or the one teacher doing all of that back and forth, that kind of thing. But to be honest, I've seen that in my primary years in Jamaica, though, where you had two teachers in one room, the big space, but it was just boards that were partitions, right? So in a sense, you could have that situation where one person is, disturbing another person, that kind of thing. Anyways, there are ways around it. And then we have station teaching, Oftentimes people think that this is just for the elementary level, the lower grades. Nice strategy for all levels. I use station teaching at the high school level, secondary level, right? Where co-teachers divide instructional content into parts, and each teaches one portion at separate stations, while students rotate between them. This allows small group instruction tailored to different tasks or learning needs. And the last one teach, one observe, right? One teach, one observe. Of course, that can be used a lot too when it comes down to even collecting data, that kind of thing. One teach, one observe. One teacher leads instruction, while the other observes students or instructional patterns to gather data on engagement, understanding, or behaviors, right? Especially during this educational climate where we talk a lot about using data to drive instruction, which I believe in. Most of my doctoral work was about that progress monitoring and adding value and using data to drive your instructional practice. All right. So that's it for the co-teaching models. And you can see easily, this is co-teaching, this is inclusion. This is an inclusion set, inclusive education. And the principles of UDL would really help to support this kind of thing. All right. Now, I want to talk about a big thing that has been gaining popularity these days. PLCs, the professional learning community. And I'm calling this slide PLC Power in Advancing UDL. Since we're talking about collaboration, PLC Power in Advancing UDL. Firstly, when we talk about inclusion, that inclusion should not just rest with the students. I would hope that administrators would recognize that it should go up to administration, where teachers too get to collaborate, different teachers, to be honest, and it's not just teachers within the same content area. I'm a secondary person, so I'll keep talking like a high school teacher, middle school teacher, just the math teachers with math teachers. No, but because if we understand how learning takes place and with accommodation and assimilation and stuff like that you'd learn in your ESI courses, if we understand that, we'll recognize that it's good for educators in different disciplines to cross-talk and sometimes even to plan, right? So that students can benefit from instruction, right? So this brings us to the PLC. Shared responsibilities, right? For everybody. Collaborative lesson design, right? A PLC. So there's a nice picture there. Teachers, so it could be a team, all sixth grade teachers, or it could be a team of multi-grade teachers. It could be a team of all math teachers, or it could be a team of a math teacher, a science teacher, social studies teacher, that kind of thing. But they come together and they discuss data, not to gripe, not to just talk about, because I've seen where a lot of PLCs are just to talk about what students are doing, what students are not doing, that kind of thing. But a real PLC, an effective PLC, it's data driven, right? So there are issues, but come with the data, empirical data from student performance. And it's not just qualitative data, bring the quantitative data too, and let's talk about it. Let the ideas contend. Let's come up with evidence statements from the data that we are looking at and talk as teachers. So that's critical. And again, special education teachers should be at the table. Special education talking with general education teachers. General education teachers questioning some things that special education teachers might be doing, that kind of thing. PLC, right? The professional learning community. As I think of PLCs, there's a nice model or paradigm, framework is the word I'm looking for, that you can take a look at. Done Pat Wright. Pat Wright has experience as a school administrator, and at one point she was in charge of the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association, NJPSA, but she has written a nice book on the CAR model. CAR is an acronym for Connected Actions Roadmap. Pat Wright. So it's online too, I think, but you can take a look at it. I like the framework. CAR, C-A-R, Connected Actions Roadmap. And she spends a whole lot of time talking about PLCs. She has a nice analogy. The car itself is an analogy, and you're seeing PLCs, the PLCs as the rail car moving things along. So if we have strong PLCs, it is very much easier for us to raise student achievement. So shared instructional expertise, best practice, that kind of thing. And not only that, ongoing reflection and refinement. We're talking about reflective practice, right? We must become reflexive practitioners, where we reflect, we fine tune as we go along, as it relates to all learners. We're talking about exceptionalities, right? Whether you're at the upper end of the spectrum or the lower end, wherever the student is, right? Gifted students or students who need more remediation, right? We should be talking about them. We should be reflecting, and it's good to share with peers. Where this, can you imagine the social studies teacher is struggling because the student has a comprehension problem. Now, if the English language arts teacher is at that table, we can see how we can have that cross talk so that we can help the student in a collaborative sense. All right. So that's the PLC in a nutshell. I don't know how much we are doing that. We might not call it PLC in the Caribbean context. I know that in many schools in the US, they actually have PLC time. So it is built into schedules where individuals, teachers get to meet, right, across content areas for these kinds of conversation. I'm trying to skip some of the things because, yes, so we can take some questions and strengthen the conversation part of it. So the last slide, last thing. So what are we taking away from this? And I call it strategic takeaways for inclusive practice. We are understanding learner variability. This exists in every classroom, everywhere. And I'm stressing every classroom, right? Learning styles, right? Different kinds of learning styles, different kinds of abilities, right? Different levels of mastery. There is learner variability. As a result of that, there cannot be a one style for everybody. And that's why we talk about universal design for learning. You teach in a certain way that every single learner is catered to, right? Universal, everybody, right? Then we talk about the shared responsibility. That's what improves outcomes. The professional learning communities, right? Teachers conversing, the conversations among educators, talking together, coming together to analyze data, right? To look at all of that. We're looking at the different co-teaching models, different ways in which we can come together in classrooms to work together, to share as educators to ensure that students achieve. Early intervention prevents failure. And that's a critical one for us to end on. Early intervention prevents failure. That's a gist, that's a premise of UDL. In many cases, we are very reactive, where we start to differentiate or we start to provide accommodations or modifications when we find that there is an issue with the student. Student is not passing. But based on the tenets of UDL, you don't do that. We talk about backward design. From the outset, you plan for instruction, you preempt, you discern learner variability, and you plan accordingly. So you go to a classroom with the notion that there is going to be variability. You go to the classroom with the notion that students are not going to be the same. And as a result of that kind of thinking, we employ multiple means of representation, multiple means of engagement, and multiple means of expression. Collaboration maximizes limited resources. That's a talk. We know that. It's not just in Jamaica, it's here too. Of course, I can appreciate what I see here more, having taught in the Caribbean context, because I tell people all the time, what we complain about here, it's really, really nonsense in comparison to what I was used to when I taught in Jamaica. And I taught at schools that were a little bit more resourceful than other schools. I taught at St. George's College where, to be honest, I knew we had a lot more resources than other schools elsewhere in the country. But so can you imagine? But collaboration, though, helps to maximize limited resources. If we can work together, we share the resources, and it will help to maximize good yields if we are working together. Inclusion begins with mindset, not mandate. So many mandates, policies, and all of that. But it starts with a mindset, right? Mindset, not mandate. My doctoral work was really about policy implementation, educational policy, and how these are interpreted, how these are carried out. And I found that there was a whole lot of disconnect between intentions and actual applications, between policies and actual implementation. So this is critical. Inclusion begins with mindset. So even if nobody talks the language of inclusion in your school, there's a way. For example, as I tried to wrap my head around this today, I said, you might not have an inclusion uh, system, so to speak, in your school, but I think there's a lot of autonomy in the Caribbean educational context, especially in Jamaica, where I practice. I don't know much about other places, but I know we are similar as Caribbean countries, but you can actually, you have autonomy. Teachers can come together and maybe, especially for smaller classes. I know that one of our biggest problems is class sizes, though. It will be a little difficult because you have so many students. But if we wrap our heads around it, there are ways, there are means by which we can come together and change the mindset, to mitigate against mandate. Collective practice builds instructional capacity. So there's a lot to be said about this topic. It's a whole mouthful about from compliance, checking boxes, to collaboration, using UDL to strengthen inclusive classroom. But I want to end the talking part, the monologue, by saying inclusion is not a mandate to be managed. Inclusion is a mindset to be cultivated. And so thank you for listening. Let's see if we can take some questions before we go. Thank you so much.
Dr. Dean Robinson, excellent, 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 excellent. This is so much. I'm hoping, I'm kind of putting a plug here. We are planning on having a forum with about 4 or 5 educational specialists in the area of special education. It would be great. Wouldn't it be great to have him back, joining those other educators where they can have their conversation? I know time is of the essence. Dr. Robinson, why we're going to be asking a set questions. I see one question. I have a few questions I could fill in until the others put their questions in. There is a request for you to the slide. If you can I see the slide with teaching models? Can you put up a slide with teaching models for us?
Okay, good.
Someone wants to just take a look at it.
All right. Are you seeing it now?
The slide with teaching models.
That's
yes,
it?
I'm sure they're seeing it. I'm seeing it.
All
okay,
right.
I want to ask. I am seeing it, so I guess you're seeing it. We have one question so far, but before I ask a question, I want to ask just one practical question here, Dr. Robinson. Again, excellent presentation. What are some practical UDL strategies teachers can implement immediately that promote engagement, flexibility, and of course, student voice in the diverse classrooms?
All right. So as you talk about UDL, the first thing that comes to mind is choice. And in many cases, like the question you asked us now, one would think that I'm going to be thinking, what can we do? There are so many things we can do, but it should start with the students. So with UDL, firstly, we try to understand the learners and have the learners tell us about their learning styles, what they like, right? And then we can help to embed that. So the biggest thing for me as a practicing educator is student voice, student choice. The students get to choose. So anything I'm doing, the activity part of it, that multiple pathways, multiple means of engagement. In many cases, the students themselves, especially, and it shouldn't be that, but when I'm working with the honor students, they tell you, hey, Dr. Robinson, can we do this today? Can we do that today? Can we do Padlets today? Can we do Socratic seminars? That's it. And so I try to get all of those things in there. So the critical thing, get the choice, student choice. Then, of course, we understand that learners have different learning styles. It's an old school thing, visual, audio, of course, activity-based, that kind of thing. Authentic experiences, I like that too. The thing is, with the internet now, students should be immersed into learning activities, right? So there are so many, you can stay in the classroom and do a field trip, call those virtual field trips. You're teaching a topic, you could stay in the classroom and go to India, right? So all of these things, so we could model, and the students can come back and they can model too, right? But student choice, understanding different kinds of learners. So we're using different activities, especially with the internet now, with the computer, different softwares. We have like your Canva, your pickers for assessment, your Padlets. You can find, it's a whole lot out there that you can use. I'm working with Verizon's innovative learning schools now. And every day, I'm telling you, my mind is just bombarded with so many, hundreds of different ways, and they want us to actually implement them. But you can go online and find so many different things. But with UDL, the catch is student voice, student choice, and then engagement through different modes.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you to, if you can send us a compendium of resources, some of the resources you mentioned, send it to us of ESI, and we'll pass it on to the staff. I have a question here from Mary. I know time is of the essence, Dr. Robinson. Mary Mejia has a question. She says, what advice would you give to general education teachers who want to move beyond and truly practice inclusive education, but have limiting formal training in special education and only one teacher in the classroom?
I like that question, right? And that's usually the case, right? And especially in the Caribbean, where you're saying maybe that person is from the Caribbean context, or only one teacher in the classroom. Of course, I'm hoping that the administrators are here, the school principals and the policymakers at the different levels, because professional development should really focus on UDLs. So we'd hope that we're seeing that in the schools because you might not have official training, it might be costly to get people to get certifications in special education. And again, not only that, I can understand the teachers' situation, because even though you're a general education teacher teaching in a gen ed classroom, we know that many of the people you are teaching ought to have been classified based on their educational profiles, especially in the Caribbean. But when I'm saying that, but it's not usually done. There are areas where people are overclassified. So I would say professional development strongly. And again, teacher autonomy, teacher voice in the Caribbean, you might find that administrators aren't doing it, but maybe teachers can come together. And if we have that passion, that fervor, we know we need it. We have research. There's some sessions like these. Thankfully, you're taking this opportunity seriously. You're on. Just attend these sessions and see if we can take them back to the schools. It's sometimes difficult to get buy-in from our colleagues, right? We know all those nuances, but truth be told, if you understand it, if you appreciate it, then you're going to be better able to sell it. And people come on board, I believe, and we can work together. But the big thing is professional development. PDs, and the professional learning community, so we can get some skills in the area of special education.
That's a valid question, a great response. I remember, of course, I'm retired now. When I served as an administrator in public school system, teachers sometimes had students who were struggling, and they would say, oh, let's have the student assess, and the student might be classified, not knowing that even if the child is classified, the child is going to be back in your classroom. So it's not the child's going to be classified and sent elsewhere. The child is coming back to your classroom. So here we go. We have to have the professional development, and we have to make sure that we learn how to take that eclectic approach in teaching our students. Okay, one person said here that they missed the first session on the 11th. Please note that the session on the 11th, and although this session will be available on the ESI site, so you go to the YouTube, the entire session we're doing here today, you're going to have an opportunity to see it again on the ESI website. Another question, we're just going to take a few more questions because I know Dr. Dean has to go. What advice would you give to balance UDL with curriculum standards and testing requirements for a large group with only one teacher?
All right, good question. A whole mouthful there. But in truth and in fact, if you're really doing serious UDL, we talk about backward design, you should start with curriculum planning, curriculum implementation, curriculum evaluation, right? So in truth and in fact, I do understand as a teacher, I can understand that you can't go back and change curriculum as quickly. It will take a process. So you're going to have to now implement based on what you have in hand. But the good thing about it is that this is not a total overall. It's just how things are done. So you're still using your objectives. We don't say I'm not sure if we're saying standards in the Caribbean now, but your objectives, your standards, SLOs, that kind of thing. And technically, you're just making sure that there is that universal access, pathways, the key thing, pathways for every single learner, right? Multiple, those are key terms, multiple means of representation, multiple means of engagement, multiple means of expression, that assessment part, because again, curriculum should also address assessment, both formative assessment and summative assessment. Curriculum should also address that. And we're understanding too that based on the multiple means of expression, UDL also addresses assessment, because you have to change that. Because now, remember, many of us are still doing the paper pencil kind of test. I'm not sure what's happening even for CXC, and even here in the US, a lot of these standardized tests that people are taking, there's not much allowance for UDL. So you might ask, but you're talking about all of this during the teaching learning approach or process. But when they go to take these tests, if they can't write, if they can't do whatever, suppose, for example, a student says, I want to draw this, I want to go do an oral presentation, but the standardized test he or she wants to take might not have allowance for that. So you can see a disconnect. However, the catch is that if the real authentic learning takes place, it will be much easier for the student to actually demonstrate that learning, even in very challenging contexts. But hopefully, as we move along, we will have a situation where UDL is informing all the different aspects: curriculum, planning, like I said, implementation, evaluation, and even for standardized tests, if I were able to address your question.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. I like that response. Very quickly, I have one question I'd like to ask to close it out because we don't have any other questions. But one person said here, Carrion Mason said that the Michael University College now offers a certificate in special education for general education teachers, and that's at 18 credit hours. That's your former college, Dr. Robinson?
That's the Michael.
You guys have a complex, you know that. Anyway, for closing out purposes, and just before I ask the last question, just remember, please make sure that you complete the end of session survey, so that you can, with a $5 donation, receive your professional development hours if you need that. And again, these sessions are accessible on YouTube on the ESI site. My last question before we close out, Dr. Robinson, and I don't know if Dr. Dice will be coming back, I'm not sure. But here's my question. If you could leave school leaders and teachers with one guiding principle about inclusive education in UDL, what would that be and why?
I'm going to go back to the same statement I gave at the end of the presentation, where when you think UDL, when you think inclusion, when you think inclusive education, think not just a mandate, but a mindset. Because if you think a mandate, you're going to be restricted in your thinking, and things will put you in a box. Things will actually restrict you. But if it's a mindset, despite the limitations, despite the challenges, resource challenges, administrative issues, if there's a mindset where there's a will, there is a way. At the core of UDL, of inclusive education, is access for all. At the core of this is student achievement. And if you have that mindset to engage every single child, I guarantee that where there is a will, there'll be a way. Thank you.
Excellent presentation. Excellent presentation. Just let me say that we have individuals from Jamaica, Belize, Guyana, Grenada, the Bahamas, Barbados, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, USA, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, and also the British Virgin Islands. Thank you so much, very kindly, Dr. Dean Robinson. And we were certainly encouraged, and a wealth of knowledge you added to the body of knowledge. And we greatly appreciate, and we hope that this won't be the last, but we'll see you quite frequently on this site, because ESI is global and we are trying to support our teachers around the world. Okay, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, remember that again, I'm going to be saying it because you're asking for a missy of the session. How can I get it? Dr. Dean Robinson's session, and will be on the site, and also the previous session we did last week. And look out for the forum that we'll be having, hopefully on the 25th, but we'll solidify that when we have several heads coming together, some principals and some practitioners, some teachers coming together, and we have a forum on this special education mandate. Thank you so much. Dr. Dice, do you have any last words you'd like to give before we go?
No. We're solid. We're good. Thank you, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you, Dr. Dice.
And thank you, everybody.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.